Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing 25.15 top lane tier list server travel content. Like, subscribe, and let's get into it. This was a relatively small patch. We only saw nerfs towards the likes of Aurelia, Quinn, adjustments towards Alawi and Rek'Sai, and then a slight buff towards Kled, who did lose a genuine amount of power last patch, with the builds kind of shifting over towards Titanic Hydra. Let's get into it. So the D tier is going to consist of the same champions. We have Maokai, who still underperforms quite heavily in the top lane. I found the best way, at least for me, to kind of like pilot this champion has been opting into Phase Rush, where you can oftentimes have that like safety net to fall back on. Grasp just doesn't really give you it doesn't give you enough trading power to oftentimes win out or like consistently trade back against champions. Thus, the safety net of the Phase Rush, combined with maybe opting into some AP in the build, does give him a bit more agency, but he's still a pick I would recommend basically avoiding. Udyr still underperforms quite heavily. Even in both cases, the AP and the AD build don't perform that well. Liandry's got nerfed more recently. The AD build hasn't really ever performed that well in the top lane, but by primarily being the Ravenous with the Trinity. The tank build's also just not as good. The nerfs towards Fimbulwinter combined with the nerfs towards Unending Despair quite a while ago at this point did hit that build quite badly, and Udyr, just as a champion, I don't really recommend him in the top lane at the moment. Sworder is a bit more different. He is almost specifically used as a counter pick to Cassante. I still think you can play him in those spots. If you already did play him before, if you didn't play Sworder back along, then you probably shouldn't play him now. It's probably not worth sinking your time into a niche counter pick to a champion which just isn't that popular in his current state. Rek'Sai I haven't added on here because it's very early days and the data suggests that she is pretty heavy powered down. I wonder if they will hotfix buff her. They might not. It's not a huge nerf down compared to the likes of Rumble, who lost a huge amount of power, which is why they went and hotfix buffed him. Rek'Sai did lose genuine power, though, so they might. It's something to be aware of. On a side note from that, though, Rek'Sai top does look to be more performant than Jungle Rek'Sai on the current patch. Whether that sustains with like follow-up changes or throughout the patch, because once again, it's very limited data on a very unpopular champion in her second role. We'll have to see, but definitely something to be cognitive of, because if the buffs end up being like lane skewed or just general power up, top lane Rek'Sai could be a genuine pick, so something to just be like aware of in that space. Moving on to the C tier, I'm leading off with Varus, who I think can be fine in the right spots. He's obviously very oppressive as like an individual champion, but he's vulnerable to ganks. He hurts team compositions, and you have to pilot him really well, because if you don't, then you oftentimes find yourself falling behind, and then you're just better off playing a different champion. But if you can, if you understand the limits of the pick, understand really how to like bully out lanes, you've got like good vision control and map awareness, then the pick can work. I think he's better, honestly, in like mid to high elite brackets. The lower down you go, the more susceptible you are to just random like variants, which can really hard to champion like Varus if you're not like already quite consistent on the pick. Cassante traditionally just doesn't perform that well for mid to low MMR brackets. He's a low agency, early game skewed tank with a pretty high mastery curve, a pick which I'd never really recommend for this elo bracket. Jace is an incredibly elite skewed champion, one of the most elite skewed top laners at the moment. His difficulty to pilot makes him very hard to recommend, albeit if you go like the lethality route, then sometimes you can just one shot a target and die, and as long as you're trading, then there is some level of like you can make the pick work. I just don't really recommend him, because you have to be able to bully out lanes so hard to get like the advantage you need to kind of like be better than the other champions in the lane. But it's just a pick I would never really recommend unless you've already put so much time into him, you really understand how to like lever those advantages. Same goes for Rumble. Hard champion to pilot, needs to be able to like abuse his strong early laning phase. If you don't, he is just weaker than other options in top lane, and will also be a pick which I just don't really recommend that much outside of like your really high end elite MMR brackets. Swain I think is a niche counter pick, can be fine. I don't really recommend him outside of those situations. He tends to struggle a bit more in the long lane. He's a pretty squishy champion until you get access to like your first, second item with your Raven stacking up. Like his baseline durability is very low intentionally, and that does make him quite vulnerable to certain matchups in the top lane. Tom Kench has been over nerfed. He's a pick I just don't really recommend at the moment. He doesn't carve that well into high elo in his current state, and he just isn't that great of a mid to low end elo pick. If you're aware of like how to play his like cheese factors quite aggressively, and you understand kind of the limits of the pick and what you can kind of get away with, then I think there are spots where he can work, but he's just a pick I'd recommend avoiding unless you've already put time into him. The general consensus with Alawi is she seems to be a bit powered down at the moment, so she'll probably get buffed in 25.16, so I'm not gonna move her up to the B tier, but there is going to be some level of like relearning with the champion with the changes which came in this patch. Overall, yeah, it'll be interesting to see where she lands. Right now, though, I do think she's slightly powered down, so I do have her as like a mid to low end C tier pick. Noah hasn't been performing that well for a while now. I like the champion in mid to high, just in like high and competitive brackets. I think as a counter pick, he can be quite a good option. But right now for solo queue, just doesn't seem to really be there in his current state. The itemization for him is fine. It traditionally like leans towards like your Trinity into Sterix pairing over like your Trinity Cleaver, which you can sometimes opt into, especially into like your Cassantes, for example, which are punished by the by Cleaver as an item. Overall, though, as a pick, outside of like counter pick matchups, and unless you've already got the mastery on him, I just don't really recommend him at the moment. I don't think he is in one of his better states. Moving on to the B tier, then we lead off with Vayne, who is doing better with the buffs towards her items this patch. I think if you're very comfortable in Vayne and you know how to use her as a counter pick, she can be a rewarding top laner. I rate her higher than Varus at the moment because I think she can be more polarizing in the correct matchups. That being said, though, if you're not a Vayne OTP, then you're probably not going to play Vayne. I don't think she's still strong enough to kind of learn as a specific counter pick option, but if you already have the mastery, you understand why you're picking Vayne, but I think she can still come out as a pretty solid option. Yone's been underperforming for a while. Even with the bulk buffs in the previous patch, he still doesn't look that great as an option. He traditionally leans more towards elite skewed. If you use him as a counter pick, I still think you can get value out of the champion. In fact, he can be quite oppressive in the right matchups, but in his current state, I just don't really recommend him that much. Maybe used as a counter pick to Aatrox and some of those like tank matchups which can't really punish you. That would probably be the best spots for Yone at the moment. Wukong is a pretty niche top lane option. He's fine. I think you can make him work if you're very comfortable on him. If you're not an OTP though, then I would probably just recommend other options over him. Tryndamere is also in a fine state. He's very degenerate, the play pattern, just trading and then sustaining through like Ravenous, Grasp, like what your kit provides for your Q. Can be really obnoxious for some like lane matchups to kind of work around, and the siege potential of his champion is very egregious. If you're not comfortable on him, I don't recommend him, but if you're very knowledgeable on the champion and how you kind of want to go about playing, or just like the standardization of the playstyle, then yeah, you can make him work in the right spot. So utilize him as a counter pick. Outside of that, I don't really recommend the champion. That usually mirrors a lot of the low B tier options at the moment. Silas as a counter pick, I think, can be a great option outside of counter pick scenarios. Ends up just being a pretty meh option. Just play a mid lane if you want to like main Silas, but I think counter pick Silas, genuine option in the top lane at the moment, so I do have him as a B tier pick in his current state. More probably like a low end B tier pick. Gwen is really elite skewed in her current state. She's being pushed there with the changes she received like a couple months ago. I don't really recommend the champion as much because she is just a hard pick to pilot, and you have to really aggressively snowball your advantages now rather than just like innately scaling up. So definitely a bit of a shift there in terms of like how you want to go about this champion, and for that I do have as like a low end beta option, but if you're very comfortable on her, I think she can be quite a good option. To an extent, Ambessa is relatively similar, where she doesn't perform that well for average elo brackets, but if you put the time into her, she can be rewarding. I think she's easier than the likes of Gwen, especially if you put the time into her, but also definitely like mirrors some of the same kind of like the sentiment where these picks perform really well in elite, not so great for mid to low and elo brackets. Gangplank I'll have slightly beneath them. I don't recommend Gangplank as much because I think Gangplank is a very OTP dependent champion. If you haven't sunk an enormous amount of time into the pick, then it won't usually get the advantages you want or need in the game. Even as a counter pick, like I think you do just have to have had the time in him, and like if you're willing to sink it into him, it can be really good. It can be a very rewarding champion to play. If you're not willing to do it, then best just looking elsewhere. He's not a consistent way of climbing. Yasuo, also within the B tier, I think as a counter pick option can be really solid. If you're not using him as a counter pick and you're just playing him in a lot of spots, then you'll oftentimes run into really polarizing quite hard matchups. Things like the Renekton and just point and click CC will shut this champion down, and traditionally you want to pair it alongside like an AP jungler with a knock up, so his conditions have to be met. Otherwise, yeah, the pick just ends up being substantially weaker. More like a mid to low end B tier option. Nasus, I'm not a huge fan of at the moment, but if you find the right spots, I think the pick can have genuine value. So find those spots. Depending on, I mean, you're not going to see like kill blinds, for example. I mean, maybe in like very, very low MMR brackets you might, but generally, it's about just finding matchups where you can kind of free scale throughout the lane and then like get to your mid game and then really kind of like take over during the mid game, because he does struggle later on to the game. You will get kited out. Compositions will peel for their carries in a lot of situations, and Nasus does struggle into that. So you have to either play as like a split pusher or have to have like accelerated your advantage quite heavily. Right now, I don't think he's in the greatest of states, so I do him as a beta option. Albeit this is probably the elo bracket which suits him best. Gragas I have in the beta. I like this champion. I think there is like genuine power in both of his builds at the moment. Like you can run things like Phase Rush, you can run things like Grasp, you can go Roar, you can go Storm Surge, you can go Proto Belt. There's like flexibility in his builds. If you want a bit more agency, like the Proto Belt into Storm Surge, I believe it is, build is really nice for that. Like especially if you like carve through your laning phase. So you go like Lost Chapter, Lucidities, Protobout, Storm Surge. I believe that is the kind of like core of that build. And you can kind of be a bit more flexible, like depending on whether you want Rabadons, you want Pen. There is that choice there. Feats are really nice on Gragas if you get access to like the upgraded Lucidities. 25 haste is absurd, so definitely something to be cognitive of. Camille, I think as a counterpick can be fine. Outside of counterpick scenario, she's just kind of mediocre at the moment. She's definitely not in one of her stronger states, and for elite she definitely doesn't appease to like a lot of the players there, especially when like a lot of her counters are quite prevalent, like your Renekton's and your Jax's, for example. Camille can really struggle at the moment. I do have her as a beta option. I think if you're comfortable playing her, you can definitely make her work in mid to low elo. If you're not, then you probably just want to move towards a different champion at the moment. Ornn, I have in the beta. He's just low agency. Like if you want to sit back, scale up throughout the game, dish out your ornaments, and you need like a go button, Ornn can be a great option. But you are sacrificing your ability to kind of like carry from a top lane. Like Ornn just won't do that compared to other top laners. So I don't really rate him as highly. It's the same reason why Sion, who I think is a great tank at the moment, I don't rate that highly for solo queue, because he just doesn't have the same kind of like what you get out of like Sion and competitive isn't the same as what you want out of Sion and solo queue. Sion and competitive is a great Stonewall champion. It will win lane in most situations. It can be a great like engage button with your ultimate, great setup with your Q. In solo queue, you are slow around the map for the most part. Stonewalling isn't really as rewarded in solo queue because you're looking to kind of like use your agency more than anything, which is why Sion just as a pick just isn't as good here. So I only really recommend him as like a B tier option. You can opt into things like Titanic Hydra, Steric, Overlord's Bloodmail if you're looking for a bit more agency, but then you're probably just better off playing a different champion in a lot of those situations. Garen benefited from the PD buffs this patch. Not this patch, in the previous patch. Sits as more like a mid to high end B tier option. Garen mains aren't happy, I believe, with the state of the champion. I know a lot of people who have kind of moved away from the pick, and that seems to be a lot of the recent reworks where people just aren't that happy with kind of where they've landed, or they've landed weak and then been slow to kind of be brought back up. And yeah, Garen sits in the B tier at the moment. Trundle, I also have within the beta. The pick I do think is very simplistic and can be quite nice as just an easy to play split push stat checky champion. He's not the highest agency, but if you get ahead on this pick, he can be he can have agency. Like, he can be very powerful around the map. But at the end of the day, Trundle just has to run at you, and if he stat checks you, he wins. If he doesn't, then the pick is just not that great. So it traditionally depends on matchups in a lot of those situations. Riven, I actually haven't looked at the data to see how much the bug fixed to her this patch. I believe it ended up treading relatively, she benefited from the bug fix, obviously. The bug was really, really bad for her, but she did lose genuine power in the previous patch, so I do have her in the beta at the moment. Whether Riot will actually follow up and buff her in 25.16, it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, they took away the buffs this patch because they were going to buff her alongside bug fixing her. So right now, I do have her as like a beta option. I think if you can pilot her well, you're still going to play her, and she's still going to be really good in Elite. But for like average elo brackets, it was a scaling nerf. It is going to affect the average Riven player more, or like the lower mid to low end elo Riven players more than like your high elo elite Riven players. there is some level of like an asterisk to that, where it was a passive nerf, and high elo players will weave the passive more. So something there still. The other picks within the B tier are the likes of Bear, who I believe is actually better than B tier. Like, he should probably be an A tier champion, but most people still go Roa on him when Cosmic Drive, I believe, has spat out like really, really good numbers for a while now. So that is definitely something to be aware of. If people start moving over, I'll bump him up to the A tier. Right now, though, if you're going Roa, he's a bit below the bar. I think he can be really stat-checking and oppressive in the correct matchups. If you're playing him into bad compositions, though, you will just get kited, and you have to snowball. If you fall behind on Bear, this champion will struggle to ever like sustain a pattern, and then kind of just fail to be relevant within the game. Malphite sits within the B tier, easy to play champion. I mean, like, if you're auto-filled top lane, you need a pick into a heavy AD composition. Malphite's the kind of champion I'd recommend. If you main top lane, like, he's a counter pick option, like R5, B4, B5 at best. And other than that, you're not really going to be playing him. I think he's fine, though, in the right spots. Like, I don't think he's a bad champion. He just needs the right spots, and they aren't provided quite as consistently as maybe he would want. And he doesn't... You're not picking Malphite in those spots to have agency. You're picking him to just be, like, a really good frontline for your other champions to have more agency. So... it really depends on how heavily you weight that when it comes to a champion like this. Darius, I have in the B tier. The buffs to him more recently were quite nice. He's not like a dominating pick by any means. I mean, obviously he's very oppressive in lane if the person piloting it is really good, and especially if you like give him those angles to like 30-sec bleed. But when it comes to like mid, like those mid game fights, if you're not really far ahead, you'll definitely struggle. Like, that is going to be something that just Darius struggles with, especially if you don't pilot the champion that well, and that is going to be a difficulty of it. I think Darius over time has definitely treaded more elite skewed. I think most people have kind of realized that at this point. Like, Darius is a really strong elite champion. In average elo brackets, people just don't really play around his strengths quite as much, and won't really and like, if you're playing into like tanks, for example, some of them will just stonewall you. Some like won't give you those snowball advantages. But I do think he's still a high beta option, because he does give you good agency if you are able to snowball the game. Aurora is a very elite skew champion, but has been slept on for a while. The buffs she received more recently kind of like reignited a lot of players' like passion for Aurora. Like, she sees a lot more competitive play at the moment. I believe she's actually seeing a lot more top lane competitive play on top of that, so definitely something to be cognitive of. But she is elite skewed. Like, I don't really recommend Aurora for like average elo brackets, but if you're very comfortable playing her, she can be a really solid option. So I do think she sits as a high B2 option. Sink time into her though, and you will be rewarded. Ryze as a counter pick, I do believe is still really good, and even just as a blind pick, like, people won't acknowledge Ryze flex quite as much as maybe they should, and that is a strength for the champion. That being said though, you have to execute the combos correctly. If you don't, then he ends up just being outvalued by other options. But if you do, he's a good option. He's a good pick. He scales really well, can be quite oppressive in lane if you space correctly on him, like utilizing like the W and the tools you have provided to you. I think he can be quite a good option. Kled, so Kled is a weird one. He got buff dispatch. The buffs were nice. More durability, which is quite funny to see. They've really like pushed towards the durability route. It was 2 to 10, I believe, flat armor and magic resist on the when you're dismounted, combined with another 0.5% bonus AD ratio slapped onto it. It's a good buff. It gives him more durability, allows him to remount more frequently, which is nice for the champion. He's still not that high on damage, and it's definitely a lot harder to find those killer angles on like Kled as a champion now. But if you're like playing him as like a bruiser, you play the Titanic, I believe Titanic, Sterix, Overlords, I think that's the 3-item core. You might have to slot in a cleaver in amongst her. Then I think as a champion, he can be really good at the moment. So definitely something to be aware of. I think the buffs were nice for durability, and if you are like familiar with how to play like the Juggernaut pattern, he can be a good option there for you. Moving on to the A tier then. Towards the low end of the A tier, I'm going to have both Aurelia and Quinn. Aurelia is in a really weird state now. So Aurelia received a change this patch to nerf her base health regen, which I believe is completely the wrong way to go out of this champion. It makes her incredibly punishing for the average player, which to an extent you could argue both sides is Aurelia shouldn't be good for the average player, or shouldn't even be viable for the average player. Or on the flip side is champions should be, like, you should be able to pick up a champion in like mid to low elo and then like gradually learn them and climb them through the ranks. Right now though, I think Aurelia, if you're an OTP, is still really good as an option, still can really aggressively snowball games. If you're not an OTP, she is a must avoid. Like, you shouldn't play this champion. Straight up, don't play Aurelia unless you've sunk a lot of time into her. She is so punishing to play, and you have to close out games. You have to push out your advantages. She's probably the most egregious version of that at the moment, out of like any champion. And yeah, but that's kind of like the verdict on the pick, is you just have to be able to pilot the pick so well to kind of get value out of it. And if you don't already play it, then you shouldn't play it. Like, I just completely would recommend avoiding it. Quinn, on the other hand, received a nerf this patch to, I believe, so I did the numbers on it. On level 1Q, I believe it is 2 damage lower than the previous patch. And then it, like, curves, I believe, like, to tread even. And then it, like, really aggressively curves down again. So by your level, I believe it was 12, 13, you are losing a lot of damage through the queue now, because the total AD ratio of the previous iteration would have outvalued and then continues to outvalue later on into the game, because it's the same numbers, but it's now bonus compared to the total, so you aren't getting like your scaling AD added onto this, albeit, I mean, like, Quinn has low scaling AD. Like, Quinn's AD only goes up to like 100 by level 18, so it's not a huge amount of power loss, but it is there. It's genuine power loss. Her Q is going to do less damage, she's going to be less bursty, and that is meaningful for a champion like Quinn. Some of your niche options within the A tier include the likes of Singe, who I still think is a very good champion if you understand the play pattern and how to proxy with the pick. I think Zac, oh no, not Zac, okay. I'll cover Zac. I think Zac as a tank, still really good here. Is a bit more weighted towards like your one tricks and like the people who really understand how to kind of like make get value out of this passive and really push like the value of the like revive in this champion's kit. So that is something to be a bit cognitive of, but I think as a pick, he's pretty good at the moment. His items are fine, so definitely something to be aware of. Heimerdinger has insane burst angles if you understand like where they come from, like his Q empower, like just anything, like his, if you get a long range strike with the E combined with like a power empowered turret or an empowered W, and then like you're looking for the burst with the like empowerment on these turrets, it can be really, really oppressive to play against, especially against certain champions which can't really break the turrets without putting themselves in like guaranteed trading range. I mean, obviously, the one I refer to is like the Argot, where he can't actually outrange your turret, and you will always be able to like deal damage to him if he ever tries to like burst one of them down. So that is just something to be cognitive of. I think Heimerdinger as a champion is really slept on at the moment and scales really aggressively with AP. Cassiopeia, I believe the verdict with Cassiopeia right now is she's fine, like she's a solid counter pick option, but the OTPs don't like the, I mean, a lot of the like the one tricks or the maybe even tourists just don't like the current iteration of Cassiopeia that she is now, ever since like those changes like couple months ago. Her pick rate in top lane has massively dropped. Like, she is the least popular, I believe, top laner on this list at the moment, which is really unfortunate to see, because it's always bad when like one tricks or just people who main the champion aren't really playing it anymore because they just don't enjoy the current play pattern of it. So Cassiopeia, definitely to an extent, I believe, has fallen victim of this, even though she's still in a relatively solid spot. Like, she's definitely not in one of her most oppressive spots, but yeah, if you like pick on the right matchup, she can be really, really solid as an option. Akali, I think, as a counter pick, is a great AP assassin in the top lane, and honestly, I kind of recommend learning her. I think right now she's a rewarding pick to play. If you don't want to learn Akali though, Vladimir, Kennen, I still both think are really, really good options. Vladimir, if you can get like a good scaling matchup, or even a matchup which you can kind of abuse early, can be a really, really good champion. Kennen, really, really solid in his current state. You have the flexibility of some of the keystones you can opt into. I believe Liandry still is viable on him. It's not quite the go-to which it was like previously, like it was like a hidden like OP kind of build on him, like the first strike Liandry. Then after Liandry, Protobelt got buffed. I believe Protobelt is a really solid option on him if you want to like consistently opt into an item, then that is there for you. And right now, yeah, I feel like all of these AP options are really, really good to like learn or just have one of them in your pool. If you're looking for some of the tanks, I think Cho'Gath is really on the rise at the moment. Great counterpick to some of the other tank options. It can be hard to blind him into some of the matchups in the top lane if they are able to just like avoid his pretty telegraphed kit and then either match him like later on to the game, like like take him down. Like anti-tanks will like Cho'Gath really struggles into. Obviously he's a very health stacking heavy tank, and yeah, right now though I do think he's in a good spot. Like I think if you can use Cho'Gath as a counter pick, really really valuable and really really good scaling, decent agency. So yeah, there's a lot of things going for him at the moment. Some of the other tanks include the likes of Shen and Mundo. I think Shen as a counter pick can also be really good. I probably rate him below Cho'Gath, albeit if you can get situations where you have a hyper carry which you know will like perform quite well, I think Shen can be a really good option there, but you aren't going to get that consistency, especially in mid to low elo. But won't like hyper carries or just like carries in general will sometimes like vary massively in terms of their consistency, so definitely can struggle in that regard. But a lot of lanes he will just stomp. Like there are champions which really struggle into the level 1 through 5 against Shen, and then if you're running Ignite, it's like all the way through 9, Shen can have a really, really good time, but will definitely struggle with the lack of a combat ultimate, especially on sides and like into the mid to late game, yeah, against like certain team compositions. Mundo, really good tank option as well. Great scaling. Obviously, if you're looking for a champion, which if he can like freely scale or like play through lane, get to his like 1-2 item power spike, like your Warmogs into your heart still, and then like your Titanic Hydra or even like your spirits or your Deadmans. If you're looking for a bit more durability, I do believe you have that like flexibility at the moment. All can be really good. Great champion at the moment. I do think in the right spots. Yeah, obviously like Alois has really promoted him quite well as an option, so definitely something to be cognitive of. Some of the other options within the A tier then. Teemo, been doing well for a while now. Good lane bully, good scaling in his current state. Overall, his just like control on the Rift can be really, really oppressive for certain team compositions. I think he's definitely treading more towards the main / OTP area, where like if you're very comfortable on him, he does like do a lot better than just like a tourist or like a casual of the champion. But if you are willing to put the time to him, I think it's a rewarding pick to have, and just like having a champion within your arsenal, like an AP kind of like counter pick situation, like control champion, it can be rewarding. So yeah, Yorick definitely better in mid to low elo as like an option. Well, I say that Yorick still sees play, I believe, in LPL. Like as a champion, he like with the maiden and like the macro you can kind of like work on with this champion can be quite solid in high elo brackets. But traditionally, the stat tricky nature of the champion combined with he's relatively telegraphed, does usually reward him in those mid to low elo brackets, but he doesn't scale as well anymore. And he and yeah, but some of the kit like shifting has definitely like reduced his power. So I don't think taking Yorick is like a guaranteed win in this bracket anymore. But used to be kind of what Yorick was, like this really really good low elo champion, but then was terrible in high. Now he's a bit more like flat, like he's a bit more solid across the board. So I think they've done a pretty good job in that. There are matchups and just like interactions with Yorick which are really degenerate. Like his ghouls are really really painful for a lot of champions to deal with. So I think if you use him as a counter pick, it can be quite rewarding, especially when like if you don't ban Aurelia, that can be a big concern of the champion. So it's just something to be aware of. Aatrox, thing as a counter pick option, still really good. I really like the Grasp in the Sky build on him at the moment. I think it's really really hard to like tear him down. He doesn't scale quite as well as some of the other options in the top lane, but his mid game, especially if you're like ahead of the curve, is really really powerful. Like your 2 or like your 2 item Aatrox, like your Cinder Sky, your Sterix, does bits. Poppy as a counter pick, incredibly good in her current state. She's definitely been pushed more towards this late game shape. Like she doesn't quite have as much agency early on to the game, which is why picking her usually in the right spots where you can kind of like either bully out a bit more or being able to kind of just like sit back, get value out of your W, and then like on your 2 items like your Cinder Sky, your Winter's Approach, that can be where she really shines as an option. So she's a bit more like reliant on those spots now, but still really good as an option. Pantheon lost some power this patch with the jungle modifier going down. That will affect him just in any role. You won't be able to like poach away camps. You'll be less relevant on objective. So there is like, I mean, it's small, don't get me wrong, it's like a very very minor change, but it is something to be aware of. You aren't going to be quite as good at like stealing away camps, but as a champion I still think in the right spots combined with his very oppressive laning phase can be a really really solid option. Jax, Fiora, Renekton wrap up my A tier. In the case of Fiora, she's a pretty OTP dependent champion. Like you need to have sunk a lot of time to her, but she's probably the most rewarding OTP champion now. I think Rhythm you could argue probably filled that spot. And I think Aurelia is like more egregious, but can be like yeah, I mean, is even more OTP dependent. So it's funny that it's like the 3 horsemen or like the 4 horsemen, and then Camille, who's just not that great in her current state. But I say Fiora kind of reigns supreme in that regard. Like, use her as a counter pick if you're very comfortable on her. But generally, like, if you're really, really, really like knowledgeable on like the matchups and how you want to go about things, Fiora can win against most champions in top lane in her current state. Like, that's just how solid of an option she currently is. Jax and Renekton are like your more mainstream options though. Like, if you're like a top laner who's put some games into these picks, they're better to go to than like a Fiora. Like, Fiora is more dependent on having the time in her, but Renekton, Jax sit at the top of my A tier. I really like these 2 champions as options. I think Eclipse can be like pretty bait on Renekton in a lot of situations, so that is something which you can kind of be a bit more flexible on. But if you are comfortable on Eclipse Renekton and you understand your lethals and how to kind of like curve it into second item quite nicely, it can still be a really, really good option. In fact, in a lot of situations, still his best option. So yeah, but there is that going for him. The S tier consists of 6 champions at the moment. I would put, I'll put Set the lower, like Set and Kale are probably my like lower end S options. Obviously, Kale's really good in this elo bracket because she oftentimes gets to scale just like innately. Like, Kale is as a champion a lot harder to punish these days, and Set did get the 0.5 armor nerf, which does mean something, and he does struggle into certain compositions which can either kite him out or just not really give him the ult angles he's looking for. You do in those situations have to really heavily dominate in laning phase to kind of be valuable as a champion. I would say the next S champion is probably Mordekaiser. The pick is really good at the moment. The buffs he received more recently to his Q were really, really nice. That being said, though, he can also fall vulnerable to some of the same issues which Set has, where he can be kited out. He can struggle when you have like no innate kind of like dashes or mobility. But these champions will struggle into those certain compositions. Warwick as a pick, still performing really well. Like, it still spits out really nice numbers. Use him, I'd say, more as a counter pick in a lot of those situations where some of the blinded champions in top lane he can really comfortably run over. But generally, Warwick as an option is just really good at the moment, especially if you understand his lethals and understand how to snowball with the champion. I think Olaf, one of the best counter picks in the game, probably my number 1 counter pick option. The champion can just absolutely stomp heavy CC, low mobility compositions. Pair him with an enchanter, and he is probably the strongest champion in the game. Like, it's just absurd how like in the right spots how strong this champion can be as an option. And my number 1, still Argot. I will still always recommend this champion. I think he's perfect for the current game state. He's very clear, understandable breakpoints of when he is powerful. Like your level 9 or like your level 1, and then your level 9 with your toggle, then your like cleaver spike, then your level 13 with your steric spike. These really definitive and clear milestones really reward just like the understanding of the champion, and then being able to use them to secure objectives, play around the map, play around these spikes. Really good. It's just like a good way to like build up knowledge of champions. It's a good way to build up understanding of what you want to do on the Rift, and I think Argot is perfect for that at the moment. So he is my definitive S, or like my clear S tier option at the moment. But I do think in the right spots the other options can be really good, and I'd say the weakness of the Argot is the fact that he has loads of punishing lanes. That can be quite a big why you wouldn't want to play him maybe so much in Elite. But if you're playing him into the right composition, which I like forced to play into you, and you're, I mean, obviously you're going to have the weakness of like if you have an enchanter, those things do matter. Like, that will be genuine loss of power of a champion. But generally, like for baseline understanding of a champion, I think he's perfect at the moment, and I would recommend him as my number 1 champion this patch. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.